Hey, so I was looking at my Mac about a couple months back, and I ended up writing a blog article about it. And it was really because it turned out my Mac environment was really complicated. Now, what does that mean? It means that I end up running a lot of virtual machines or hypervisors either on purpose or accidentally to do some of the things I want to do. So on my MacBook, right, I do a little bit of Docker work because that's what we're doing every last couple places I worked. Um, I also got involved in some of the CTF, capture the flag kind of events, and Kali Linux is the thing to run there. So I ended up running Kali Linux as a VM on my Mac, and that way if I needed to install some kind of software to do the capture the flag hackathon events, then I could do it on a virtual machine and not kind of corrupt or clog up the main machine. The other thing is I tend to run Windows. There are a couple programs I still use that are Windows only. And the Mac has this really cool boot camp thing, so you can either run Windows as a virtual machine or you can run it as a like a dual boot. Now, in that case, for Windows, if I wanted to run Windows containers or I wanted to do something else with Docker, I actually ended up running Docker in the Windows machine that's running in a virtual machine that's on the Mac. And the other thing is, if you run Visual Studio and you're doing any mobile development, and Visual Studio on the Windows box is still a little more straightforward. They haven't quite unified all that together. They tend to run mobile emulators. And the emulators, like if you want an Android emulator, that's another virtual machine. So the way my machine really looks, like I said, I got Mac OS 10. It turns out Docker on the Mac is actually built on a virtualization product or technology called HyperKit. And that's built on top of the hypervisor framework. So if you're running a Mac with none of this other stuff, you're still going to be running HyperKit with Dockers, right? On top of that, I tend to run VMware Fusion. You've got a choice between Parallels and VMware Fusion. I would consider moving to Parallels now because they do a better job with DirectX support for Windows, whereas pretty much Fusion doesn't do anything useful there. I mean, it's like DirectX a couple back. And then this Kali VM is just a Kali Linux VM. The only thing that doesn't do very well, sometimes you have USB problems. If you want to use like a remote antenna or certain specialized devices that there are no Mac drivers for, sometimes the pass-through works, sometimes it doesn't to the Kali Linux. This is Windows 10. Generally, I always have a Windows VM on my Mac. And you can do, VMware Fusion easily does virtualization pass-through, so you can run another hypervisor. So you can actually run Hyper-V on Windows, on VMware Fusion, on a Mac. And then on my Windows box, because I don't really... If you want to run Docker, you got to run Hyper-V, or you want to run some of their other stuff. So that's what I end up doing. I used to run VMware Workstation, but with Hyper-V now, it's like, is it worth fighting? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay, and then if you install Visual Studio with the mobile emulators, you end up with a virtual machine. So in this world, I actually have two virtual machines running on my PC that's running on my Mac, and I've got three virtual machines, really, this virtually, running on the Mac itself. And that's it. So, and that would be it, and I would like do a timeout and quit right here. But I was thinking about the machine that I'm doing this presentation on. So my PC, it's actually a why did I do that? I don't need to do that. It's on Windows 10. And so Windows 10 run Hyper-V. I run Docker on it, so it smells a little bit like the one up above. I have Visual Studio installed with the mobile emulators, so that's two VMs really set up on Hyper-V. Now Docker's actually going to move to something else. They're going to move off of basically the Moby VM that they use, but I'm not running the WSL2 version yet. There's some things I like about the old one. And then I actually was playing around with thinking about running parts of Azure Stack or a Windows virtual cloud. So we used to do this a lot when I worked at VMware. We ran a set of virtual machines inside a virtual machine. So if you wanted to bring up a whole network of boxes that were all configured to talk to each other, you would actually just have to bring up one virtual machine because all the child virtual guests in that would come up too. That's kind of like Kubernetes in a way, right? Like you can run a Docker stack and with a Docker Compose or a Swarm or Kubernetes, and it lets you bring up a whole bunch of machines in a single config. We used to do the same thing with Windows Server. So that's actually what my Windows box that's big enough to do anything looks like. The laptops I've got generally are only, I don't do any Hyper-V in the Windows on those guys. It would just be Windows 10 Hyper-V with a Windows Server in it, maybe, but generally all I need is the mobile emulators and Docker on my Windows boxes. So that would be the left-hand side of the screen, and my desktop tends to be the whole stack. So I'm sure your virtualization might even be more complicated than mine, but I just wanted to give people a feel for like how you can do different things on one machine and have it look like it's all installed on that box native, and without having to clutter up the box. And that's it, man.